It didn't look like an aircraft. It looked like a mistake. A jagged shape, faceted like a broken diamond, with edges so sharp it seemed carved by a mathematician's chisel instead of an engineer's hand. No wings to speak of, no curves, no grace, no soul of a fighter jet. And yet, this was the machine that would change everything. They called it the Hopeless Diamond, a cruel nickname for a strange prototype that even seasoned pilots thought would never leave the runway. Aerodynamicists swore it was impossible, an object so unstable that it should tumble out of the sky the moment it lifted off. On paper, it was a disaster waiting to happen. But paper doesn't win wars. This bizarre angular beast didn't need to be pretty, or fast, or even particularly powerful. It needed to do just one thing: disappear. Every line, every angle, every facet was designed not for the human eye, but for the cold, unforgiving gaze of radar. It was built to vanish inside a screen of static, a plane that could sneak into the most heavily defended airspace in the world, deliver a deadly strike, and vanish again before anyone even knew it was there. And against all odds, it worked. But here's the paradox. This so-called stealth jet wasn't fast. It wasn't agile. It carried only 2 bombs, barely a fraction of what its rivals could unleash. And if stealth ever failed, if radar locked on, the pilot inside had no way to fight back. No missiles, no guns, no chance. So how did the United States bet billions on something so fragile and win? That is the story of the F-117 Nighthawk, the world's first operational stealth aircraft, a machine born in secrecy, doubted by experts, and destined to terrify enemies who never saw it coming. But to understand why this strange black triangle rewrote the rules of modern warfare, you first have to understand the world it was born into. The 1970s were an age of paranoia in the skies. The Soviet Union had built some of the most fearsome air defense networks the world had ever seen. Layers of radar, surface-to-air missiles, and interceptor jets created a nearly impenetrable shield around its territory. Flying into that airspace, whether with a bomber or a fighter, was practically a death sentence. The United States Air Force knew it, and they were terrified. Traditional advantages no longer worked. Speed? Soviet missiles could catch even the fastest jets. Altitude? Radar could see high-flying bombers long before they reached their targets. Firepower? What good was a payload of bombs if you were destroyed before dropping a single one? The Pentagon needed a new answer. Not just a faster plane, not just a stronger one, but something radically different. Something that could step into the very heart of enemy airspace and never appear on a screen. That desperate vision landed in the hands of Lockheed's Skunk Works, a secretive team of misfits, engineers, and dreamers already famous for impossible projects like the U-2 spy plane and the SR-71 Blackbird. Their task this time was even more insane: design an aircraft that could not be seen. They didn't turn to traditional aerodynamics. They turned to mathematics. Soviet research had already suggested that flat surfaces, carefully angled, could scatter radar waves instead of reflecting them. So Lockheed's engineers built a plane out of equations, not instincts. The result looked nothing like an aircraft anyone had ever seen. It was ugly. It was unstable. It was dangerous. But if it worked, it could slip past the most advanced defenses on Earth. The gamble was colossal. Billions of dollars, America's air superiority, and the lives of the pilots who would one day fly it all hung on the edge of this experiment. This was the dawn of stealth, and the world would never be the same again. The story of the F-117 begins not with an aircraft, but with a theory. In the early 1970s, the Cold War was balanced on a knife's edge. Both the United States and the Soviet Union knew that whoever controlled the skies controlled the future of war. The Soviets had built dense radar networks that could detect and target even the fastest American jets. No matter how high or fast the US tried to fly, Soviet missiles could still find them. And then came a strange discovery. Buried deep in Soviet research was the work of a physicist named Pyotr Ufimtsev. His equations showed that radar didn't always bounce back cleanly. If a surface was angled just right, flat and faceted like a gemstone, radar waves would scatter in useless directions, never returning to the receiver. To radar, the object would simply vanish. Lockheed's Skunk Works got hold of this research, and where others laughed, they saw potential. They asked a terrifying question. What if we built an entire aircraft out of those equations? The result was a bizarre design that seemed more like origami than aviation. No curves, no graceful wings, just sharp angles, tilted panels, and a body that defied every aerodynamic principle known to pilots. To most, it looked impossible, so much so that the first mock-up earned its infamous nickname, the Hopeless Diamond. Engineers scoffed. Pilots shook their heads. An aircraft like this should never leave the ground. Its shape was so unstable that even if it managed to take off, it would tumble back to Earth within minutes. But Skunk Works didn't back down. They built a prototype, small, experimental, and fragile, called Have Blue. It wasn't a fighter, it wasn't a bomber, and it certainly wasn't pretty, but it carried the DNA of a revolution. The gamble was breathtaking. Billions of dollars and America's air dominance hung in the balance. If Have Blue failed, it would be the most expensive embarrassment in aviation history. And then came the moment of truth. In 1977, Have Blue rolled down a hidden runway in the Nevada desert. Engineers held their breath. Test pilot Bill Park pushed the throttle forward. The jagged little craft rattled, strained, and then, against every prediction, lifted off. It flew, unstable, twitchy, and only because a primitive computer made hundreds of corrections every second. But it flew, and more importantly, when radar searched for it, the screen stayed empty. The Hopeless Diamond had become invisible. It was a miracle of mathematics and nerve. A design that should have stayed in the pages of a Soviet textbook was now rewriting the laws of combat. Still, there was doubt. Was this just a stunt? Or could this strange, fragile bird actually be transformed into a real war machine? That question would lead Lockheed down the path of radical choices. Decisions that would make the F-117 one of the strangest, most controversial jets ever built. When Have Blue proved it could fly, Lockheed faced a new challenge, turning a fragile prototype into an operational warplane. And that meant making decisions that went against everything the Air Force thought it knew about combat aircraft. First was the matter of weapons. Traditional jets carried bombs and missiles strapped beneath their wings, creating an intimidating silhouette, bristling with firepower. But those external pylons were stealth's worst enemy. Every missile, every bomb casing, every fuel tank hanging outside the fuselage created radar reflections. For the F-117, the rule was absolute. Nothing could break the cloak of invisibility. So, Lockheed made a bold trade-off. The F-117 would carry all of its weapons internally. 2 small bomb bays were carved into its belly, each capable of holding just one precision-guided bomb. Compared to heavy bombers that hold dozens of weapons, it was shockingly limited. But this was no lumbering fortress. It was a scalpel. The mission wasn't to level cities. It was to slip in, strike with precision, and disappear. Then came speed. Every fighter before it had been designed to outrun, outclimb, or outmaneuver the enemy. Pilots trusted speed like a shield. But speed leaves a trail, a sonic boom that rattles windows, a plume of heat visible to infrared trackers, a radar signature amplified by afterburners. The F-17's designers flipped the script. Instead of going supersonic, the Nighthawk was deliberately kept subsonic. No booms, no bright exhaust trail, just quiet, steady flight through the shadows. It was a predator that survived by silence, not sprinting. Stability was the next hurdle. Those jagged edges and sharp facets made the jet aerodynamically unstable. A human pilot couldn't possibly balance it. The F-117 wanted to tumble at every moment. The solution was revolutionary. Fly-by-wire controls. The pilot's inputs didn't move the control surfaces directly. Instead, a computer sat between man and machine, making constant adjustments, hundreds per second, to keep the aircraft in level flight. The pilot flew the computer, and the computer flew the jet. Without that invisible guardian, the Nighthawk would flip into a death spiral. Even the cockpit was redesigned in the name of stealth. The canopy glass received a thin film of gold, just enough to block radar waves from bouncing off the pilot's helmet and face. The controls inside were minimal and practical. No fancy features, no luxuries. This was a tool, not a toy. Every detail of the F-117 was a compromise. Engineers asked one question over and over again. Does it make us invisible? If the answer was yes, it stayed. If not, it was cut. Firepower, speed, maneuverability, all sacrificed for the one advantage that mattered. The result was a machine that broke every rule of aircraft design, a bomber with the payload of a fighter, a jet so unstable it needed a digital babysitter to stay airborne, a combat aircraft that could neither fight nor flee if discovered. By traditional standards, it was weak. By stealth standards, it was unstoppable. This philosophy, stealth above all else, set the stage for the breakthroughs that would make the F-117 not just invisible, but lethally precise. If the F-117's shape made it invisible, its internal systems made it deadly. This was not a jet that could overwhelm enemies with sheer volume of fire. It carried just 2 bombs, no more. That limitation meant every single strike had to be exact. And so Lockheed poured its genius into the question, how do we make 2 bombs hit harder than 20? The answer lay in precision. Inside the nose of the Nighthawk sat a steerable infrared turret, a sensor that could peer through the night, lock onto heat signatures, and guide weapons to their targets. A second infrared sensor was mounted beneath the fuselage, paired with a laser designator. Together, they formed the aircraft's eyes, capable of painting a single target and guiding bombs with pinpoint accuracy. On a clear night, an F-117 could glide silently over a city, drop 2 bombs, and strike a building window without touching the structures around it. But stealth demanded more than just sensors. The engines themselves had to be redesigned to stay hidden. Traditional supersonic fighters roared across the sky with afterburners blazing. Great for speed, but a death sentence for stealth. The F-117 couldn't afford to announce itself with heat and thunder. Instead, engineers selected the General Electric F-404 engine, borrowed from the F's A-18 Hornet. Reliable, quiet, and efficient, it provided just enough thrust to keep the Nighthawk aloft without drawing attention. The exhaust nozzles were flattened and shielded, spreading hot gases to reduce the infrared signature. Even the heat of the engines was weaponized, not to burn brighter, but to fade into the background of the night sky. And then there was the greatest challenge of all, making it fly. Those sharp angles and flat panels weren't aerodynamic. Left to itself, the jet would wobble, stall, and spin out of control. No human pilot, no matter how skilled, could tame it. To solve this, Lockheed introduced something radical for its time: quadruple redundant fly-by-wire controls. Instead of the pilot moving control surfaces directly, every input passed through computers that instantly corrected instability. If one computer failed, 3 more stood ready. The system didn't just help the pilot, it saved the pilot every second of every flight. The cockpit, too, reflected this strange marriage of fragility and brilliance. Instruments were simple, utilitarian. The canopy was coated with a thin film of gold, making sure radar waves couldn't bounce off the pilot's helmet and betray the aircraft's presence. Even the smallest details were sacrificed to keep the illusion of invisibility intact. Piece by piece, the Nighthawk became something unique, a bomber that could strike with surgical accuracy, vanish without warning, and survive in skies filled with hostile defenses. It wasn't designed to win dogfights or to carry the most bombs. It was designed to sneak past everything an enemy could throw at it, drop 2 bombs that mattered more than 20, and slip away unseen. This combination of stealth, precision, and stability by computer wasn't just engineering. It was alchemy. Lockheed had taken an impossible shape, matched it with unproven technology, and created a machine that turned theory into battlefield reality. But even brilliance comes with a cost. The very traits that made the F-117 extraordinary also left it vulnerable, and those vulnerabilities would shape its legacy forever. For all its brilliance, the F-117 Nighthawk was never invincible. In fact, the very qualities that made it revolutionary also carved out its greatest weaknesses. The first weakness was speed. The Nighthawk was deliberately subsonic. While other fighters tore through the skies at Mach 2, the F-117 cruised slower than a commercial airliner. It couldn't outrun interceptors. It couldn't punch the throttle and escape. If an enemy ever spotted it, the chase was already lost. The second weakness was defense. The F-117 had no guns, no air-to-air missiles, not even a defensive tailgun like the old B-52 bombers. If it was detected, the pilot had only one option: pray the cloak of stealth held. Unlike an F-15 that could fight its way home, the Nighthawk was either unseen or destroyed. The third weakness was weather. Its precision bombing depended on clear lines of sight for its laser-guided munitions. Clouds, fog, or sandstorms could scatter the laser beams and blind its sensors. In bad weather, the Nighthawk's surgical strike capability disappeared. Missions could be delayed, or worse, flown with dangerous uncertainty. The fourth weakness was payload. 2 bombs. That was it. While a B-52 could flatten an entire grid square, the F-117 had to make every strike count. If the target set was too large, commanders had to send in entire waves of Nighthawks, each dropping just 2 weapons to achieve what other bombers could do in a single pass. That meant every mission had to be chosen with extreme care. And yet, these vulnerabilities were part of the bargain. The Nighthawk was never meant to replace fleets of bombers or dogfighters. It was a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. It struck the most critical targets: the bunkers, the command centers, the radar stations that held enemy defenses together. One precise cut in the right place could collapse an entire system, but the risks never went away. Every pilot knew the truth. If stealth failed, the Nighthawk offered no second chances. It lived or died by invisibility alone. That gamble, between fragility and invincibility, was what made its combat debut so shocking. Because when the F-117 finally went to war, it didn't just survive. It redefined the battlefield. The F-117 wasn't built to impress at air shows. It was built to terrify the enemy in ways they had never imagined. And when it finally entered combat, it did exactly that. Its first real test came during Operation Just Cause in Panama, 1989. A handful of Nighthawks flew precision missions, striking critical targets with eerie silence. But this was only the rehearsal. The world would not truly understand the F-117's power until the Persian Gulf lit up in 1991. Operation Desert Storm. Iraq's air defense system was among the densest on Earth. Radar sites, surface-to-air missiles, interceptor aircraft, all woven into a deadly net. Military planners warned that penetrating the shield could cost dozens of aircraft and countless lives. But on the night of January 17th, 1991, something impossible happened. Waves of F-111s lifted off from Saudi Arabia and slipped silently into Iraqi airspace. To radar operators, the skies were clear. To Iraqi commanders, the night was calm. Yet above them, ghostly black triangles glided undetected, threading through a defensive network that had been considered impenetrable. Then, explosions shattered the silence. In those first hours alone, Nighthawk struck Baghdad's command centers, radar hubs, and communication nodes. By dawn, Iraq's vaunted defenses were blinded. The air shield that had been decades in the making had collapsed in a single night. Across the entire war, F-117s flew more than 1,200 sorties, hitting over 1,600 high-value targets, and not a single aircraft was lost to enemy fire. For the first time in history, an air campaign had been won, not by overwhelming numbers, but by invisibility. The psychological impact was immense. Enemy soldiers whispered about ghost planes that appeared only when buildings exploded. Iraqi air defense crews, watching empty radar screens, panicked as their cities burned. Fear itself became a weapon, and the shockwaves rippled far beyond Iraq. Militaries around the world suddenly realized that the age of speed and brute force was giving way to something new. Stealth wasn't a gimmick. It was the future. The Nighthawk had proven that one small, fragile-looking aircraft could dismantle entire defense systems without being touched. The doctrine of air warfare had changed overnight. From that moment on, every serious military knew if you couldn't see the enemy, you couldn't fight the enemy, and no one would ever look at the skies the same way again. But the story of the F-117 didn't end with triumph. For all its victories, it carried the weight of its vulnerabilities into every mission, and those vulnerabilities would one day catch up with it. The F-117 was never perfect. It was slow, it was fragile, it carried only 2 bombs and had no way to defend itself. By the standards of traditional aircraft design, it should have been a failure. And yet, it became a legend. Because the Nighthawk wasn't about doing more, it was about doing different. It taught the world that victory in the skies didn't always belong to the loudest, the fastest, or the strongest. Sometimes, victory belongs to the one you never even saw coming. From its first missions over Panama to its stunning dominance in Desert Storm, the F-117 didn't just prove stealth worked. It rewrote the entire playbook of modern air combat. Its faceted black skin became a symbol of American technological daring, a reminder that even the strangest ideas can become unstoppable weapons when backed by vision and risk. Every stealth aircraft that followed, the majestic B-2 Spirit, the lethal F-22 Raptor, and the versatile F-35 Lightning II, stands on the shoulders of the hopeless diamond that once made test pilots laugh. The ugly duckling that couldn't fly became the dark swan that changed the skies forever. And yet, one question lingers. Was the F-117 truly the most dangerous stealth jet in history? Or was it simply the first to prove that invisibility is the ultimate weapon? That's for you to decide. So tell us, in your view, was the Nighthawk revolutionary or overrated? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and let's settle the debate. And if you want more stories of impossible engineering, shocking military gambles, and the secret machines that shape our world, make sure to subscribe, because this is just the beginning. Because in war, what you don't see is often what changes everything.